All right, welcome to part 3 of the realistic lighting, shading, and texturing workflow pipeline production extravaganza in Blender 3D. Today, we are going to be looking at specifically at compositing. I know I mentioned in part 2 that we would get to it, but I decided to move that to part 3. And so we are going to be looking at how to composite a rendered image and make it look extra snazzy, give it some extra cool effects, and make it pop. Essentially, we're going to be taking our Gorgon image and making it look somewhat similar to this, with the bokeh blur and the glare and all that stuff in the background. So, with that being said, let's dive right into Blender! Alright, so here is our Gorgon model. Here are the shading and texturing things on it, our image-based lighting. We are back right where we were at before. We've gone over these render settings and how to set it up for this scene. I'm going to make a couple quick tweaks here just to get us started. And then I'm going to start setting up a camera and a couple extra effects to give us a very nice rendered image. So to start, I'm going to set the seed value of this back down to 0 because it was at 3 before. And I'm going to make sure that my resolution is up to 100% so I can do a final test render when this is all said and done. I have the clamp indirect lighting up to 1.0. Without it, you get some bright fireflies. There's a couple in here. I mean, it's really hard to see. They're in there. But clamp indirect will clamp those fireflies down. So I turn that up to 1, and it starts to get rid of a few. There's still a couple floating around, but it's okay. Light paths. I'm not using transmission, so I'm going to turn it off for now because I really don't need it. I got reflective and refractive caustics on because my computer can handle it. I've set my minimum bounces to 0, my max bounces to 7, diffuse, glossy, and volume bounces to 4. Not using volume. I am going to leave it on, though, just in case we do some fun volumetric spotlighting or highlighting stuff. But for now, just don't worry about it. In terms of film, this is where you can choose to set the background transparent. We are actually... I don't know what I'm going to do with that setting yet. I feel like I am probably going to turn it on or show you a quick workaround to give you this transparent background sort of thing here. It involves render passes and object indexing. So I'm going to go ahead and go over to the we were in the render panel settings over here before. I'm going to go over to the scene settings, or the render layer pad, and turn on object index because we're going to use that later. And then beyond that, here in this panel, I have use environment, use surfaces, use hair, all of that checked. I only have one layer to mess with right now, so there's nothing to worry about there. And I have all my passes set up so that I can use these passes later to edit this image. We don't need any misting. We don't need our normal pass or vector or UV. I've also included the emission and AO values, or render passes. So for now, I will turn the transparency back, or turn the transparency off. So we get this shaded background just to have something to look at, something nice to look at, that sort of thing. Yeah, so let's get started. We have our Gorgon, and we are ready to make it look awesome. So, first things first, depth of field effect. Depth of field is one of those things that really helps add in realism to your scene. It basically approximates what a real-world camera does when it focuses on an object that is close or far away. So when you're focusing on something in the distance, or a camera is, then while you're doing that, anything that's close to you gets blurred out. You can still sort of see it, but it's not a You definitely don't get the sharp highlighting. It's out of focus essentially. So depth of field simulates that effect. You can add depth of field in by clicking your camera and going over to the camera settings menu over here, and depth of field settings are found down here at the bottom under depth of field. So we don't have a focus object now to focus focus the depth of field effect on, but you can set the distance. And because I have metric system enabled here, I'm getting real world values, so meters and centimeters, because the scaling is set to 1 as well. So let's see, 1 blender unit is 1 meter in this scenario. So 1 blender unit here is one of these squares. So yeah, from the camera here, you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, looking at about 4 meters. About 4 meters to the front face of my object. So I would set this to 4 if I wasn't going to use a focus. But we are going to use a focus because it makes life so much easier. So to add in a depth of field focus effect, all you have to do is press Shift and A and scroll down to empty. And we're going to add in a plane axis empty. You can change the size over here. I'm just going to leave it at the default value, and I'm going to move it to where I think it will best serve our purposes. So for this, I'm going to move it to the front of my Gorgon model here, because I want the camera to basically we're looking to simulate, not simulate, but how do I say this? One of the main tricks in photography, and one of the things you'll see in most good images, is rule of thirds. And what that is, you can turn on in the camera display composition guides. You can turn on such like golden triangle, the golden rule, composition, thirds, etc. So for this scenario, we're going to turn on thirds, and I will turn the alpha. I wanted these dots here to be thicker so you could see them better, but it's fine. So it splits the image into thirds. So here, 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 and here. Typically, you want your object of focus to lie upon one of these intersection points. So whatever you're focusing on, your object should be not necessarily centered, but be around this point here, or this point, or whatever. And then you can use the third lines to set up where your foreground, middle ground, and background are going to be. So if I was to move, and I'm going to do one more thing here after I show you this. If I was to move this Gorgon model here into this top area, or sorry, if I was not parent it, but put it on this rule of third intersection here, it would technically be in the foreground and partially in the middle ground. So our background would essentially be this top third of the image over here. So that's where I would add in effects and stuff behind it to make it look better. And then anything else you want to offset your composition, you throw in up here on the corner. So your eye would naturally draw a line from this corner down through this diagonal line down to this corner. So you can use these composition guides to get a nice flow to your image and a very nice compositional effect. Composition has two different things. It has two different meanings. In most 3D applications, it has a lot to do with adding in effects and post-production and that sort of thing. So whenever you hear comp or composition, that's what most people are usually talking about. But one of the parts of compositing is composition itself, where an image is placed, or where an object is placed in the image, and where other objects are placed in reference to your main subject or main focus in a scene. So real quick, I'm going to go ahead and actually add another empty in here in the center to recenter your cursor. This little floating guy here, your cursor basically tells you where you add stuff in at. So if I add a plane, it's going to add it in at my cursor. But I'm going to press Shift C, and that is going to recenter my cursor and my viewport for me. When I do that, I'm going to add in another plane axis empty, and this empty I'm going to make a bit bigger, poking out like that from the Gorgon. And what I will do here is, starting from the bottom up, I'm going to select the base, I'm going to select the shell, and I'm going to select the brain. And the last thing I'm going to do is select the empty that we've set up here. And I'm going to press Control P. What that does is allow me to parent all of these objects to the last selected object. So I'm parenting the base of the Gorgon, the shell of the Gorgon, and the brain of the Gorgon to this empty. So I'm going to parent to object and rename this empty Gorgon.control. Cool. And we'll do a little save. So now I can just grab this control empty and perform all my operations on the Gorgon, so I don't have to move each individual piece. So that helps. Now, before I set up depth of field, I'll just move this guy, or hide him by pressing H. Before I set up depth of field, I want to go ahead and orient my Gorgon for dramatic effect. So I'm going to perform some rotations and just make him look a bit more interesting. We'll try to capture this back view, and we'll try to do it as if he's like flying off in this general direction. So to do that, we're going to position our camera now, and I'm going to position it so that he is sort of centered on this point and along this line here. And because I want to basically look at capturing a very large chunk of the I'm almost trying to simulate what it would look like if this Gorgon thing was flying off the ground into the sky or into the distance of like a city or something like that. So because of that, I'm going to change the focal length of my camera. And the focal length basically says how focused you want the camera to be on something. So you can do field of view or millimeters. Millimeters is more film speak, while field of view is, I guess, more artist friendly. Right now we have like a 50-degree viewing angle, so as we increase the viewing angle, we get more perspective distortion. So this definitely looks distorted, but we have a larger field of view. On the other hand, if you look at the millimeter settings, the focal length is 6.04 millimeters. So in this scenario, I want to simulate what it's like to shoot with 70 millimeter film. So I'm going to set my focal length to 70 millimeters. And that's going to zoom my camera way, way in. And that's okay. From there, we're going to change the camera presets, and we're going to change the camera size. So there are all these camera settings in here that simulate what it's like to shoot with a real camera. But I am going to plug in 65 millimeters for my camera, because this is like the real sensor size of a camera. So I'm changing this to 65. I'm trying to get that effect. I don't know if any of you saw Hateful Eight, but it was shot with a 70 millimeter film, but with a 65 millimeter sensor camera. So that's what I'm going for here. I don't necessarily know if these settings are perfectly right. I may have something confused here. This is just my basic understanding of how these camera settings work, and it's not a huge deal. The main thing you want to focus on is this focal length and what that's set to and that sort of thing. So, yep. Anyway, let's go ahead and position our camera to focus on the Gorgon here. So I'm going to zoom in some, rotate along the z-axis. I'm just trying to get it into a good position here. And I honestly might do this instead. So let's press, if you press Alt R, it'll clear the rotation of your camera. If you press Alt G, it'll clear the location. And if you're doing this on an object, you can press Alt S, and it'll clear the scale. So I've cleared all my transformations out, so I'm going to rotate on the x-axis 90 degrees to start. So that'll angle it directly face on. And then I'm going to pull it back from its center point by pressing G and then pressing Z for global Z, which will move it up and down, and then Z again for normal Z, which will move it front and back. So I'm going to position it back here, and then I'm going to take my Gorgon and rotate him again. And instead of getting that mountainous sort of scene, that mountain effect or whatever, I'm going to go as if he's flying into the scene, like so, like swooping down on something. So that's what we're looking to capture here. So as you can see, he's lined up kind of on this center point, and the objective will be to put something else about right here where this cursor is, kind of where he is looking right now. So press Shift C to get a quick test render. That is what he looks like. And I may do some turning of him just a little bit to really accentuate that effect. Also, if you want to move your camera around, let's say you're trying to shoot or you're trying to capture a architectural rendering and you have walls and floors and everything, and you feel like your camera is just not lining up on your scene correctly, you can shift the camera without actually moving it. You can shift it on the y-axis, and you can also shift it on the x-axis to get it to line up with those horizontal and vertical lines. I don't really have any vertical lines in this scene right now, so I'm not worried about that. My horizontal lines are fine. It's matching up with the grid okay, because I didn't really perform any rotations on it. But if you are having issues getting your camera to line up and getting your image to look right, then this can help with that. So I'm going to I accidentally pressed H. I'm going to press Alt H to unhide everything. So that's going to bring this guy back. And I'm going to put my cursor on the Gorgon on his eye, like right on the center. And I'm going to press Shift S by right click to select the empty here. Press Shift S to snap whatever object or the cursor if you have an object selected. So I can snap the selection to the cursor. And that's what I'm going to do here. So this is now on top of the Gorgon, right on his eye, which is great. Let's go back to the camera view, and we are going to select the camera and set up depth of field. So this empty is just named empty. I'm going to go ahead and rename it now to camera underscore, or let's do dot. I like dots better. Camera dot target. So when I go back to my camera, down here under depth of field, I set the focus to camera dot target. You can also use this little eyedropper here and click on an object in the scene, and it'll just automatically put it in for you. So I'm going to do that guy. Sweet. Now, I don't have any settings over here right now. These are all the default settings. Nothing is going to happen, or something is going to happen, but I'm not going to get the effect that I'm looking for. So when I go ahead and preview render this, as you'll see here, I'm really not getting any depth of field right now. However, if I start turning this up, you will start to see that depth of field effect come into play. So we want to get this down to a value that looks right. If you're using radius, the settings are a little bit harder to tweak. Or I take that back. They're honestly a little bit easier to tweak than the f-stop values. I really don't understand how the f-stop values work in Blender right now. They don't seem to produce the results that I would think they do, so that may be something that needs to be looked at. Yeah, I may just be using it wrong, but radius tends to give me stuff that I can really work with. It makes more sense. So I'm getting some focusing things going on here. You can see that the top part of him over here and over here is starting to get out of focus a little bit as I turn this up more and more. becomes more and more of the image goes out of focus. So if you turn it up too high, you'll start to see like these artifacts here, and that just doesn't look very good. So we are going to just slowly increase this until we get to a value that looks nice. I think right around here, 19. Let's go with 18. My girlfriend's favorite number is 18, so we're going to pick 18 because it's fine. And I don't know if I necessarily like this lighting, so we're going to do a quick little lighting tweak. And just over here in the default lighting panel, underneath the world properties, you can change the angle of the lighting as you please. So I'm going to see what changing the lighting may do for me here. This oranginess here is annoying, so I may need to go fix that. And let's see here. Go to materials, and I have the brain selected. It's not really, there shouldn't be any reason why it's orange other than it's reflecting these values and the ground kind of. So I could turn it to blue, and that's going to cancel that out a little bit, and I'll do that. And that helps some. So sweet. We're going to stick with that. Let's head back to free space. So this already looks pretty decent. We got a good depth of field effect in. We have good textures and materials and lighting. Now let's add some more fun stuff. You can really start to see depth of field like we have it here in this image and in this image as well when you start adding in bokeh effects. And you can control bokeh in that same camera settings panel underneath the depth of field settings with the blades and rotation and ratio. So blades basically says how many polygon, like what type of polygon is going to be present in your bokeh. So I have on this image here, as soon as it comes up again, go to our studio page, onelux.com, blah, 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 whatever. We like cool stuff here, yay. Here I have polygons. I have like 6-sided polygons set up. So down here I would basically put in 6, and that would give me those same bokeh light polygon effects. So we're going to go ahead and add that in now. So press Shift-C to recenter my cursor, and I'm going to add in a plane. And this plane is going to serve as an emission plane for our particles. So let's go ahead and scale it up about 3 times to get it closer to the size of Gorgon himself. And save, since we haven't probably saved in a while. And press Control-A to apply transformations. So I press Alt-G, Alt-R, or Alt-S to clear transformations, and then I press Control-A to apply those transformations. So I'm going to apply the rotation and scale. Now that I have done that, we are going to actually move him over 1 layer to layer 2, because he's not going to be that plane is not going to be an active object rendered in the scene. The particles are, and we will enable them, but we don't necessarily need them on this same layer. And then over on layer 3, we're going to add in spheres, just all spheres of different sizes. So this sphere is really chunky and blocky right now. Let's turn the segments down to 16 over the side over here. Everything else in the setting panel is good. We need these spheres to be relatively low poly since we're going to be using a lot of them. So we could even go lower. We could go down to like 12 or 8 even, but 12 is fine. Computer can handle it, so I'm just going to use it. And what we want to do is go in and add a modifier. So the modifier is over here in your properties window. So click the add modifier button and add a subdivision surface. You shouldn't need any more than 1 subdivision. Put on optimal display and go ahead and select smooth shading, and that will give you a very smooth sphere. You could go up to 2, but for what we're doing, you don't actually need it, and it adds over 1,000 polygons to your scene, so it'll just slow you down in the long run. So go ahead and Control Save, and we're going to move this guy over a couple steps and press Alt D to duplicate him with the same modifiers and everything applied. So I duplicated him by pressing Alt D, and I'm just going to move him over another space. I'm going to scale him down to a different size. We're looking to get these spheres are basically going to act as our particles. We're going to have the same material applied to all of them, or you can use a different material for each if you'd like. And you want spheres of different sizes, so when you call these spheres as a group, your particle engine has different size spheres to work with and can add some very cool randomness to your scene. So let's press Alt D again, move him over, and scale him down even smaller. And then we'll get one kind of in the middle of these two sizes. So Alt D will move you over here again and scale you up a bit. And those look like they're going to be great particles. So press Control Save, and now you'll want to group all of them. So right click on each one and use that last active one and press Control G to create a new group, and call this particles.bokeh. Naming conventions are important. Yes, know that. Moving forward, we're not going to add a particle system to these. We are going to add it to this plane. So let's go ahead and rename the plane as well, particle emitter. And we're not going to worry about these spheres because whatever, it's fine. We will name everything else besides those. And we're going to press a new particle system. So right now, there's only one particle coming out of here. If I press Alt A, you'll see these particles start falling, and that's fine and good, but that's not the effect we want. So first things first, go down here and scroll down to field weights, and turn off gravity because we don't need gravity. So now the particles will move upwards in the direction of their normal emitter geometry. You can change the velocity of your particles in this panel over here. So I'm going to give all my particles a very random velocity so they kind of move wherever they want to go. Let's go with like a 0.2 setting. That's cool. And then let's speed them up a little bit. Bring this up to about 2.4. That's moving fast. Now we're not going to have these particles moving actively. They're not going to be moving in the scene. We're just doing this to get them spread out and in random positions, doing random sorts of things, so it all looks random and stuff. So we only need like 1,000 is probably plenty. We're going to emit them from a random location and we're not going to use an even distribution because we want it to look as random as possible. And from there, we will go ahead and turn off or turn down this in value. So they're only alive for 50 frames. So I'm just going to turn this down to 50. And you'll see them stay alive for longer. And I'm going to turn the simulation down to 50 frames total. So it just loops a little bit better. And if you look at this now, that's probably way too many particles. We don't need that many. So let's go down to like 100. I didn't change anything. There we go. 100 is still probably too much, but we're going to leave it. And now to call in these spheres, all you're going to do is have this selected, go down to Group in the render settings of your particle settings, and you're going to use select whole group, or not whole group. You're going to select pick random, and you're going to have the scale value selected. And the duplication group you're going to use is particles.bokeh that we set up earlier. So click that. And now it is duplicating all of those little spheres from earlier. You can change the size of those spheres, so make them bigger, make them smaller, and you can give them all a random size. So I'm going to randomize their size some and make them slightly bigger. In comparison with the Gorgon, those are all a good size and will give good light bokeh background behind him. So let's get this to a frame that looks nice, and then view this from our camera. So we're going to go ahead and move this guy here, and actually move him a little bit behind the Gorgon, because we want those bokeh effects to be blurred by the depth of field settings. So because our because our depth of field object is here, anything behind it and not generally within its radius is going to get blurred. So we're going to move the particles back over this way so they blur out a little bit better. And I'm just aligning them now. So press Alt-A again to redo the simulation. And now we see that those particles are more over there. And I actually want to spread them out some. So I'm going to scale this up a little bit and press Control-A to apply it. And that is looking okay. Maybe make them a little bit bigger. I mean, you can just sit around and endlessly tweak these settings to get the effect that you want. And I may turn up the emission number a little bit more. 125 is fine. Okay. So let's scrub to a good looking frame. That one here, we're at the end of the simulation. That frame looks nice. Okay. So if you render this right now, it's kind of going to look like crap. But as you can see, we are getting this bokeh effect now. Like, these particles back here are getting blurred by our bokeh effect. It's not as strong as I probably want it, but when we go in and change the material, you will see it get a lot stronger. Last thing, some of the particles in front are not getting blurred out at all. So to fix that, I am just going to move this back here. And now, if I, I'm going to go back into the particle settings and give this a longer lifetime and change the simulation time so we have more frames to look at and work with. This is going to look a bit better now. Let's give these particles a longer lifetime, up to 100 so they stick around, and change the number back up to 150. So let's see this now. And that is great. Press Shift-Z to preview, and now everything should be getting blurred. All of these are getting blurred behind him, and it looks a lot better. The plane is still present, though, and we don't want the plane. We don't need it, but we don't want to see the plane, but we need the layer active so the particles themselves will be instants. So, and visible to our render. So to get rid of that, we are going to go down to display. Actually not display. We're going to uncheck this emitter object. So click that. And you can also change some other settings in here, like any particle that's died or is unborn, you can have it render it as well. And I need to bring my plane down. I am basically just doing this tutorial on the fly, so I mean, I haven't practiced this or anything, so I'm just going through and showing you my workflow, just on the spot. This is kind of how I do stuff. So, you know, endless testing and making sure things work right, and that looks great. I'm going to turn the geometry up a little bit higher though, like 10. They're going a little slow. There we go. That's better. And make them slightly bigger. Randomize the size more. Bigger. Good. Good, 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 good. And that looks great. Maybe move the plane back a little bit more, just for a little bit more of that blurring. But yeah, we're gonna scrub to frame 42 here. Sweet. Okay, so now you have your depth of field bokeh effect. You can continue tweaking it as you please. You know, you may want to get it going a little bit further over here. So you may want to add a couple more particles in just so that it covers your whole screen, because I didn't do that. But now I did. So let's go back to frame 42. That doesn't look nearly as good. Let's do it over. Yeah. That's cool. We're going to go with that. Okay. So now we've got all these little particles back here. Like I said, you can keep tweaking them, make them a little bit bigger, so you get more of that effect, more of that depth of field blurring effect. But lens bokeh is really cool, and it makes your image look great. So, sweet, done. All right, now we are going to give them a little material, and this will go very, very fast. So, go to the materials page, make sure you have your emitter selected. And actually, you don't want to have your emitter selected. You want to have your sphere. So click this first sphere and go to the FAPPR default material, or whatever material you want. And actually, we don't even need to do that. We just need a new material. Let's call this particle dot mat. And I spelled that wrong. So particle material here. And we're just going to add in a simple emission shader. We don't need the diffuse, just an emission shader. So each of these particles should be sharing the same material, I believe. Maybe not. Yeah, it's all sharing the same material, but it's not showing that it's being used across multiple. I don't know. Whatever, never mind, not important. So we're going to connect an emission node, and we are going to connect a mix RGB node to that emission node. So the mix RGB is going to mix between two colors. So let's pick some colors that are opposite of the colors that we have here, so they really stand out in the image. So we've got this orangish color here. So anything opposite of that, we're going to go for like this blue. And we have some blue in here, so we're also going to avoid that. So we're really looking at these purples and greens. So we're going to go for a lightish green here, and we're going to go for a, and you can turn these values up to 0.999 as well. Sorry. Yeah. And over here, we're going to want to make this like a, let's see, we made it a lightish green. Let's make it a lightish purple. Now you probably can't really see what's going on right now. Let me turn the strength up, and that's still not doing anything. It's hard to see because it's bright. What can I say? So it's mixing right now. It doesn't look very good. We are going to mix by inputting particle info. Yay. So this is going to control what color it gets. So size will control the color, lifetime will control the color, age, all of that stuff will control basically your particle, or your particle colors. So let me see here. Let me find which node we need for this. We need a vector normal node. Sorry. So plug location into the normal, and this is going to give you all sorts of different information. Plug that into your mix node, and it is not giving me what I want. Darn you, Blender. Darn you. Stop it. I had something set up for this, and I can't remember what it was. We'll just do random. So now it's going to randomly mix between the two. Yay. Done. That'll work. I mean, you can go play with these and that sort of thing, but I'm just going to do a random mix. Okay. Better. Alrighty, now that each of our particles has a material, let's flip back to the main scene. Now you can see, look at all those particles. Look at all their great materials. Yay. You can turn on the strength of the color, or of the emission. So I'm going to change that down to like 0.7. That's a pretty decent value. So now we have a very realistic looking scene, but it's hyper realistic with some like fantasy elements going on here. It looks good. We really don't need to do anything else at this point. I mean, you can add in some extra stuff here to kind of like sell the fact that this guy is going into something, but for our current purposes, this works. So what I'm going to do now is set up for final rendering. And we're going to include these two scene layers. We're going to include a combined Z object index and AO pass. We're also going to include all of our diffuse, glossy, transmission, subsurface pass. We don't actually need subsurface, we're not using that, and we don't need transmission, we're not using that either. We're also going to include an environment pass as well. No masking, no layer exclusion, except for excluding the third layer, because we don't want any of the information, any of the shadowing or anything coming in from these, or the extra light coming in from these spheres here, because they're emitting light into our scene. So we're going to exclude those from our render layer. And last but not least, we are going to include a pass index on the Gorgon models, so that when we use our object index pass, we can isolate them from the scene. So we don't have to turn off the transparency setting. We can still get this lovely, crazy background effect. So go into your Gorgon model in the object panel and turn on the pass settings. Click pass index 1. And all of these models will now be mapped to one index here. So if you have like 10 models in your scene, you can put in 10 different pass indexes, and all of your models will show up in a different pass index. So you can isolate them without necessarily having to move them all to different layers and that sort of thing. So yes, awesome. Awesome sauce. And I have now done that for all objects. I also need to do it for the control object as well. So and I'll add that control. I don't actually need to do that. Never mind. Okay, so our Gorgon model is set up. Most of our settings are good. We're going to go down here into the sampling sampling area and turn the samples up to 625. Or not, whoa, sorry. Turn it up to 25. That's going to get us about 625 samples. For a scene like this, that's probably overkill. I mean, typically for a scene like this, I could even go 40. 32 is good. It's going to get me 1,024 samples. This should render in less than 3 minutes, so that's fine there. Our light paths are good to go. We have filter glossy on, and we also have clamp indirect on to get rid of extra fireflies. So that all looks nice. We don't need transparent, and all these settings here are okay as well. The image is being processed to the compositing engine, and everything looks good. So we are going to give this a final render. So I'm going to pause while that happens. So